In this video, I will experiment and change some building steps, add minor modifications, and play with the camouflage painting and heavy weathering. So let's get started. Hello friends, and welcome to my channel. It's been a while since I've built an armor vehicle, so this time I will build the Russian T-80 main battle tank. It's a 1/35 scale, and this model is much cheaper compared to other manufacturers. This Zvezda kit is the rebox of the 1989 Dragon T-80. So these are very old moldings and I can't look for any better quality. There are some details, but most of the plastic is very thick. I will see what I can do. The only cool feature that I like are the additional Contact 1 explosive reactive armor and the tank tracks. They are not from rubber. The instruction manual is straightforward. The build steps are squeezed together and it's very difficult to read them, so be very careful not to miss anything. The manual includes 3 camouflage schemes, but I think I will go my own way. Very well then, I will see what I can do about it. Okay, let's start with the build. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell for not missing any new notifications. This time I will start with the wheels. I cut them out of a plastic sprue with pliers and clean them with a sharp hobby knife and a sand stick. The plastic is much softer, just like on the Zvezda's 1/35 scale Tiger 1 tank that I built last year, so it's much easier to work with. On the wheels are very ugly molding lines. They need to be sanded down. In fact, every wheel had the same problem. I also cleaned the edges with a smooth sandpaper. After that, I glued the wheels together. A fine layer of Mr. Cement S glue is applied on the sanded surface. The glue etches the plastic and leaves a smoother surface. Now let's work on the hull. The fit is not the best. It will be necessary to fill it up with putty. Every small detail on this kit has the same problem, and that are the seam lines. Everything must be properly cleaned up before the assembly and paint job. But if you are sometimes lazy like me, you can clean these small details afterwards. I mentioned before that I will experiment a little bit. This time I will glue the wheels and tracks together to the hull. On the Tiger tank I assembled the wheels and tracks the last, and I struggle with that. The model will be quite dirty from mud, soil and dust, so this procedure should not be such a big sin. Next, I cut out and clean the tank tracks. I will proceed with them by applying a small layer of Mr. Cement S glue to the joints. The glue creates a sufficiently strong and flexible joint, and it takes a little bit longer to harden. This way I have enough time and I can manipulate with the tracks. Now I simply bend the tracks to the required shape and slowly glue them to the wheels. Of course, the shape must be observed. I prefer to check the joints a few times to see if it's not crooked, and then continue gluing. The assembly looks quite good. I'm satisfied. And again, there are also visible seam lines on the tracks. They must be sanded down. After sanding, I add a smooth layer of Mr. Cement S. Let's continue on the hull. I glue the upper part and start to glue details like the Contact 1 explosive reactive armor, headlights and tow hooks. On some places, the upper part was slightly bent and gluing was a little bit hard. To the Contact 1. It's a very nice addition and the tank will look more badass with it. The big parts are also a little bit bended, so I glued it with superglue. There was a big problem with the headlights. They didn't fit a bit. I had to cut them a couple of times to fit the joints. To add more armor, I had to remove some details. They didn't fit the molded details, so more plastic surgery on the front. The sides of the structure were okay. There were no big visible gaps showing. During the build, I also assembled the turret with a big 125mm cannon. Unfortunately, the turret fit is much worse, and the cannon also. I sanded down some imperfections with a sand stick and filled them with a diluted putty. I still have some old putty left in my stash. Now it comes very handy. To dilute the putty, I added a drop of leveling thinner. The rubber side skirts are too thick. They need to be sanded down to at least 1 mm. To do so, I use my micro drill with a grinding tool. After it's done, I bend it with tweezers or my fingers. Be careful to not use too much force, they can break easily. I found a couple of very nice pictures of battle damaged T-80's front and rubber side skirts, so I will take these pictures as an inspiration for my build. The rubber will be practically half torn away. First, I draw a line and then I slowly cut the part into a needed shape. The tank's front section looks much better with some modifications. Well, unfortunately, the fit wasn't the best, so before the paint job, I had to do much more putty filling. I also replaced the footrest with copper wires. Yes, I could make some more metal adjustments, but this build is such a small intermediate project alongside the Tornado GR1 from Revell and others. So I tried to keep it simple and straightforward. The putty on the turret dried out. I sand down the putty with a smooth sandpaper and then started to add all the details. Most time-consuming work was on the Contact 1 blocks. every block must be glued separately. For more time for geometrical adjustments, I glue them with a Revel contact glue. The whole turret took me 2 days to complete. I didn't expect the work that time-consuming. At the end, I glued the tow ropes and the additional fuel tanks. Okay, the tank assembly is finished. For an old school kit, it looks pretty nice. Let's see what I can do with the paint job. First of all, I must repair and fill all gaps with putty. The plastic is much softer than on other models. I don't want to spend too much time and destroy details by sanding. For this project, I will prefer this quick method, but it works only on small gaps. I dilute the putty with leveling thinner and then gently press the diluted putty with a paintbrush into the gaps. I let it dry for 5 or 10 minutes and then immediately remove the excessive putty with a cotton swab soaked in thinner. And it works perfectly. The model is ready for surfacing. The hull will be sprayed with Surfacer 1000. But the turret includes lots of details, and a spray in a can can't do it on its own, so I must airbrush it. There are still some gaps visible on some details. I must sand them down and add another layer of Surfacer primer. The T-80 tanks experienced a real tough battle in the 1990s. During the Chechen wars, they delivered and also took a heavy punch. So I decided to paint my model like one of these combat-approved machines. For the camouflage, I will use Mr. Color C2 Black, C39 Sandy Yellow and C303 Green. But first, I highlight all panels with a black pre-shading. The wheels and tracks are painted black also. It will create an artificial shade. I want to create a chipped and worn-off surface. As a base coat, I use a mix of Mr. Color 303 Green and white. Now I will apply the Mick Jimenez chipping fluid. If you saw my Star Wars AT-ST build, you probably know that it needs to be applied on a matte surface. To do so, I added a layer of my own matte varnish mix. The chipping fluid is applied in 2 layers. Best is to wait 5 or 10 minutes between layers. Please don't rush it up with a hairdryer. Just let it dry on its own. Now for the camouflage paints. I began to apply the C39 Sandy Yellow first. It's because I needed to create a contrast between the green color. I applied the paint very smoothly, so the chipping fluid will be still good to reach. The second is the C303 Green. All camouflage paints are diluted in a 1:5 ratio up to leveling thinner. And the third is the C2 Black. There is something that I like about this unordinary camo. I think it's the combination of the sandy yellow, green and mostly the black color. Next, I paint all the details like spare tracks, tow ropes, the heavy machine gun, headlights and much more. And of course, the wheels as well. I thought that it will be much difficult to paint them after I glue them into place, but it wasn't difficult at all. Both sides took me an hour to paint, so it's a small satisfaction, but it will be covered in mud, soil and dust anyway. The tracks are dry brushed with a mix of red-brown and red color to imitate rust, and again dry brushed with a steel color. But I think this procedure will be repeated after the heavy weathering. Next morning, I look at the model and saw that something is still missing. Both shading. To create a much smoother contrast between the colors, I added a little bit of white to the original camo color. The surface looks much more worn off. Now for the chipping effect. All I need is a flat paintbrush, tap water and patience. The water gets under the camouflage color and reacts with the chipping fluid. The result looks fine. I just have to be careful not to overdo it. Next in a row is chipping with metallic colors. For this procedure, I use a very thin paintbrush. I try to be very patient, because painting chipping with a paintbrush is very exhausting. And now much more chipping on the rubber skirts. Actually, chipping rubber skirts was kinda fun. I enjoyed much more than the metal chipping. The whole camo painting must be sealed off with a layer of glossy varnish coat, because I want to apply enamel filters and washes. I bought lots of new products for weathering. This model will have a brown filter for Russian dark green tanks and deep brown wash from Mick Jimenez. Next, I seal the washers with a mud varnish. Let's get the tracks dirty. I have some very good mud effects from Vallejo and MIG. I want my T-80 to look like it has been through it all. Mud, grassy terrain, dust, and finally fighting in urban areas. The Vallejo mud and grass effects is perfect for that. It creates a very nice and interesting texture. Now for my favorite oil paints. I wanted to try out my new acrylics, but I failed, so I'd rather stay with something that I know. My goal with the oil paints is to highlight much more details like these cannon wraps and painting much more faded areas of the camouflage surfaces. I really like this technique a lot. It's very easy. After the oils are applied, I simply blend them with the surface. The whole procedure is repeated on the hull also. I also paint some rusty areas. The machine must look like it's been used for a longer time. For the exhaust and cannon I use a black and dust pigment from AK. It imitates fumes from the exhaust and cannon fire. The tank is not dirty enough. I want to create more dirt and rubble effect. Real soil and small stones could do the trick. I took this sample from my garden. There are also some small roots, so they come in handy too. I never did this before. I'm a little bit nervous. I don't want to cover the whole surface with soil. It's best to work slowly. After that, I will adjust and remove two large stones and buried places of it. They don't look very nice on this scale. The soil and tiny rocks are sealed with a pigment fixer, and I let it dry properly through the night. It looks like everything turned out well. At the end, I added mud splashes with a flat paintbrush covered in MIG Jimenez mud splashes effects and a toothpick. And the Zvezda's 1:35 scale T-80BV is finished. Despite the fact that the moldings of this model are very old, I really enjoyed the build. Even though the kit has its imperfections, you can create something nice and interesting. After all, our hobby should be versatile, and most important, we should enjoy it whether we build an old or a new model. I hope you like this video build. Please subscribe to my channel, like, or leave a comment down below. If you are interested to see more of my work, join me on Facebook or Instagram. There's a link in the description. Thank you for watching guys, see you next time, and here's the final reveal.